step into the untamed Wild West where cowboys roamed, outlaws ruled, and a surprising secret thrived: cannabis. From Mexican laborers to rebellious frontiersmen, this plant wasn't just medicine. It was a way of life. But how did it shape the Old West, and why was it forgotten? Stick around as we uncover the hidden history of cannabis cowboys, a history of weed in the Old Wild West. Before we continue, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. During the 16th century, cannabis was introduced to the Western Hemisphere by Spaniards who brought it to Chile, primarily for fiber production. In North America, the Spanish also cultivated cannabis, mainly as hemp on various farms. In the early colonial period, hemp emerged as a significant crop for farmers. Alongside tobacco, hemp became a major export long before the American Revolution. This began in 1611 when the first settlers of Jamestown, Virginia, transported a few plants across the Atlantic. By 1619, King James I instructed these American colonists in Jamestown to intensify their efforts to benefit England. The Virginia Company, which oversaw Jamestown, directed landowners to cultivate and send 100 hemp plants to support England's needs. Over time, colonists expanded hemp farming to bolster England's presence in the Americas. Cannabis cultivation played a crucial role in shaping the early days of what would become the United States. Even George Washington grew hemp at Mount Vernon as one of his primary crops. During the 18th and 19th centuries, hemp was extensively utilized for producing rope and fabric across the United States. After cannabis reached New England in 1629, it remained an indispensable crop in North America from that point until after the Civil War. Hemp was a cornerstone of both colonial life and the early economic strategies of the United States. In 1775, Kentucky began cultivating hemp, and by the 19th century, large-scale hemp farms had emerged in states like Mississippi, Georgia, California, South Carolina, and Nebraska. Beyond its industrial uses, cannabis gained recognition in medicine. By 1839, Irish physician William O'Shaughnessy introduced cannabis to Western medicine after observing its medicinal applications in India. He demonstrated its effectiveness in alleviating muscle spasms and pain, as well as treating conditions like migraines and sleep disorders. Cannabis quickly became a common remedy for pain relief until aspirin's invention later diminished its prominence. During this period, efforts to regulate medicine sales intensified. States enacted laws to address issues such as mislabeled drugs, undisclosed narcotics and medicines, and improper sales practices. These regulations often required clear labeling of dangerous substances or restricted their sale to licensed pharmacies with a doctor's prescription. Some laws also prohibited selling these medicines to minors and limited prescription refills. These measures aimed to ensure consumer safety while controlling the distribution of potentially harmful drugs like cannabis. In a bulletin from the United States Department of Agriculture during this period, it was reported that 29 states had enacted laws concerning cannabis. States such as Wisconsin and Louisiana mandated a doctor's prescription for cannabis sales, while others, including Nebraska and New York, required labeling but did not list restricted drugs. In New York, cannabis was initially classified as a poison under a law passed in 1860 after several suicides were linked to substances later deemed poisons. The first draft of this law prohibited the sale of cannabis without a written order from a physician. However, the final version permitted sales without a prescription, provided the purpose and buyer's details were recorded. All packaging was required to display the word poison in uppercase red letters. Even in states where cannabis was not included in poison laws, there were ongoing efforts to regulate its sale and use. In 1880, a bill introduced in California sought to regulate the sale of opium and other narcotic poisons, including hemp-based preparations. However, this proposal was withdrawn in favor of a bill focused solely on opium. Despite this, additional bills addressing hemp-based drugs were introduced before the end of the century. Between California and the Mississippi River, the lack of regulation prevailed, as lawlessness in many territories and emerging states left local governments without any decrees or orders prohibiting cannabis cultivation or use. Historians note that cannabis is a wind-pollinated plant that thrives in human-altered environments, such as fields cleared of trees or brush, conditions that perfectly describe the American frontier during the mid to late 19th century. By this time, cannabis was widely available in the western United States and became a popular alternative to tobacco due to its abundance and adaptability. Cannabis use became especially prevalent in areas where tobacco was less accessible, particularly in Western territories. It was cheaper and could often be found growing along roadsides, depending on the region. The widespread availability of cannabis in the Wild West marked the first time it was consumed primarily for its psychoactive effects rather than medicinal purposes. This shift transformed cannabis into a recreational substance, giving rise to the so-called cannabis cowboys. During the 19th century, as irrigation projects reshaped the western United States, Mexican laborers introduced cannabis to new regions in the West and North. Following the Mexican-American War, Texas became home to a significant population of displaced Mexicans and those fleeing Mexico's political turmoil. As a result, Texas was one of the first frontier areas to see a notable increase in recreational cannabis use. This trend was largely confined to working-class communities, particularly among Mexican laborers. During this period, cowboys, many of whom were African American and Mexican, were among the groups that embraced cannabis recreationally. However, cannabis did not gain widespread popularity among settlers on the frontier. Other substances like alcohol, opiates, and narcotics remained the preferred choices. Cannabis also crossed the border with a new name, marijuana, an anglicized version of the Spanish term for reefer. Its recreational use in the U.S. began to rise in the early 20th century, brought by Mexicans fleeing the dictatorship of President Porfirio Diaz. One of the most iconic figures associated with cannabis during this time was Francisco Poncho Villa, the legendary Mexican revolutionary leader. Known for his military brilliance and celebrated as a Robin Hood figure, Villa was also a cannabis enthusiast. While much about his personal life remains mysterious, his exploits have been immortalized through oral traditions and folk songs in Mexico, such as corridos. These songs often highlight his military achievements and his association with cannabis, painting a vivid picture of his life and legacy. The songs associated with Poncho Villa, such as Adelita and La Cucaracha, depicted him not only as a skilled military leader, but also as someone who embraced life's pleasures, including his fascination with cannabis. During the Mexican Revolution, these songs became cultural staples, immortalizing Villa's exploits and lifestyle. Adelita tells a tragic love story, while La Cucaracha became Villa's anthem, celebrating his victories, struggles, and indulgent lifestyle. La Cucaracha notably highlights marijuana use, which was widespread among Villa's troops during the Revolution. Approximately half of his army, including many Yaqui natives, reportedly used marijuana, sometimes before battles, believing it enhanced their strength and courage. Alongside marijuana, Villa's soldiers often consumed mezcal and sotol, alcoholic beverages made from desert plants. Villa himself was renowned for his extravagant lifestyle, earning him a reputation as a charismatic leader who knew how to enjoy life while maintaining his status as a brilliant military strategist. Despite leading poorly equipped and untrained troops, Villa orchestrated successful operations that inspired loyalty among his followers, the Villistas, even during times of scarcity. Born as Doroteo Arango, Poncho Villa's early years were defined by poverty and struggle. He gained fame as an outlaw and bandit, becoming a folk hero to impoverished farmers whom he often supported through raids on wealthy haciendas. Villa was also infamous for his romantic escapades, which included numerous marriages and relationships. However, his life took a revolutionary turn in 1909 after the death of his daughter and mistreatment by a wealthy landowner fueled his desire for social justice, prompting him to join the revolutionary movement. Initially, Villa's involvement in the revolution was driven by self-interest. At the time, Mexico was teeming with revolutionary factions, and Villa saw an opportunity to profit from looting, plundering, and violence as part of the Revolutionary Army. His perspective shifted after meeting Francisco Madero, a prominent revolutionary leader whose ideals of land reform and social justice deeply influenced Villa. Despite lacking a full grasp of political complexities, Villa pledged his loyalty to Madero and the revolution, though he occasionally struggled with his fiery temper. Villa's revolutionary path was fraught with challenges. He narrowly avoided execution multiple times, often saved by last-minute interventions from Madero. Despite his commitment to the cause, Villa endured hardships, including 4 months in a Mexico City jail before orchestrating a daring escape on Mexican Independence Day. After fleeing to El Paso, Poncho Villa quickly reorganized and formed a new army in Chihuahua City. Following a hard-fought battle, his forces captured Juarez, where Villa assumed control, introduced various reforms, and funded his lavish lifestyle through taxes and legalized activities such as gambling and prostitution. During his time in Juarez, Villa lived opulently, financing his army with hidden treasures and indulging in luxuries like expensive cars and an endless supply of cannabis. Villa earned widespread recognition as Francisco Madero's top general and even returned control of Chihuahua City to the people as a symbolic Christmas gift. However, his fortunes began to wane when his old rival Venustiano Carranza rose to power with backing from the United States. Villa's infamous raid on Columbus, New Mexico, provoked a punitive expedition led by General Blackjack Pershing. Although Pershing failed to capture him, the relentless pursuit drained Villa's resources and diminished his influence. In a final attempt at glory, Villa launched an attack on Juarez, but suffered defeat due to his troops being intoxicated and unprepared. He eventually retired to a ranch, but was assassinated in 1923. His death marked the end of a complex and controversial figure whose legacy remains a topic of debate to this day. Poncho Villa and his Mexican contingents left a lasting impact on cannabis consumption across the American West. As the United States rapidly developed at the turn of the century, the lawlessness of the open frontier began to fade, replaced by organized local governments. The Wild West era was ending, and with it, the casual acceptance of cannabis. As cannabis use spread in the United States, it became tied to negative stereotypes about Mexicans. In the 19th century, newspapers and medical journals primarily referred to it as cannabis. However, by the early 20th century, marijuana became more common, partly due to anti-cannabis campaigns highlighting its Mexican roots to fuel anti-immigrant biases. The criminalization of cannabis is often linked to powerful groups with economic motives to suppress hemp production. These groups circulated stories associating cannabis with violent behavior, especially among Mexican immigrants. This fear-mongering, combined with existing prejudices, led to state-level restrictions and eventually federal prohibition. In 1937, Harry Anslinger, the U.S. Narcotics Commissioner, testified before Congress, using racially charged anecdotes to advocate for marijuana prohibition. He claimed that marijuana use was prevalent among minorities, particularly Black and Latino communities, and linked it to violent behavior and societal disruption. Similarly, Henry J. Finger of California's State Board of Pharmacy expressed concerns about cannabis use among immigrants, emphasizing its spread to white populations. While anti-cannabis rhetoric often carried racial undertones, the narrative that marijuana was outlawed solely due to Mexican immigrants oversimplifies the issue. Mexico had already banned marijuana in 1920, well before the U.S. federal crackdown with the Marijuana Tax Act of 1937. Concerns about cannabis stemmed not only from racial biases, but also from fears about its effects. Before the 1900s, cannabis was primarily recognized for its medical and industrial uses. However, by the early 20th century, sensationalized media reports began portraying marijuana as a dangerous drug linked to violence and mental instability. For example, a 1905 Los Angeles Times article sensationalized its dangers, contributing to shifting public perceptions. Despite these narratives, there remains limited historical evidence about marijuana's actual usage patterns during this period. Questions about dosage, consumption methods, and interactions with other substances were largely unexplored, leaving much of the fear surrounding cannabis rooted in speculation rather than fact. The experience of consuming cannabis varied significantly depending on the method, such as smoking a joint mixed with tobacco versus ingesting cannabis-infused food or drink. By 1936, every state had outlawed the recreational use of cannabis, and the federal government reinforced this prohibition with the Marijuana Tax Act of 1937. Despite these restrictions, cannabis use persisted illicitly until the 1960s. During that decade, it regained widespread popularity, particularly among young people and the hippie counterculture. Cannabis became emblematic of anti-establishment movements and was frequently seen at protests against the Vietnam War. However, it remained illegal for all purposes. In 1970, cannabis was officially banned entirely under the Controlled Substances Act, following the Supreme Court's 1969 decision in Leary v. United States, which struck down the Marijuana Tax Act. In the Wild West, cannabis served multiple roles, transitioning from a medicinal remedy used by immigrant laborers to a recreational drug associated with outlaws and cowboys. Its journey across the frontier mirrors broader societal changes, shifting from acceptance to prohibition and back again. Although cannabis was criminalized for much of the 20th century, 24 states have since lifted their bans, with an additional 14 allowing its use strictly for medicinal purposes. Cannabis in the United States today bears little resemblance to its role in the late 19th century. As society continues to navigate the complexities of cannabis regulation and shifting perceptions, its historical significance during the Wild West era serves as a powerful reminder of its cultural impact. The plant's ability to adapt to and influence the societies where it is found highlights its enduring relevance in both historical and modern contexts.